Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christiaan Cutlick.
And today we're going to do something a little different. We're calling this Dissecting Fiction Discusses. I didn't tell Christian we were calling it that beforehand. I just made that up about 4 seconds ago. But that's what we're going to call it, I think. Sound
That's
good?
going to be like 5 hours of work for me to put that in. You know, that's a pretty. You got to clear that beforehand with me.
We'll see. I'll cut and paste it for you. Don't worry. But, we wanted to take a moment to discuss, and, if you guys end up liking this format, please let us know, because there are a number of topics we could get into. This is going to be kind of more of a little bit industry-based, I guess, would be the way to look at this little sub-brand we're developing here. And today we just want to take kind of a general look at the state of all these massive conglomerates kind of taking over media. I think the first thing on this road to what we're about to talk about is the Fox-Disney merger. And it's sort of, merger is a loose term. I always feel like these sort of, you got to kind of put them in the context of whatever it is. In this situation, clearly Disney did not merge with Fox. Clearly Disney took Fox's IPs. This was all wrapped up in March of 2019. There are caveats to that as far as television. Disney does not own Fox News Network, things of that nature. But for the most part, the media that 20th Century Fox had acquired and had generated over the years is now part of the Disney Corporation. There were a few big shakeups in the last few weeks. There had been a lot of rumors with the more reliable leakers that essentially in all studios right now, not so much chaos, but a lot of movement. I shouldn't have said that because I want to name this corporate chaos, because it is chaos to a certain extent, but not necessarily something that's a reaction to a negative thing, just a lot of motion, which is creating a lot of different situations. I'm going to jump back a second too, because there is a player in here. I think it's important, and if a lot of people don't know the situation, it'd be a little confusing. MGM Studios, who, one of the first big studios in Hollywood, for many years now have been not an active studio. They've essentially been a studio only in name, holding a lot of different rights to films and franchises, and allowing other studios essentially to make those films for them. Since about 2000, they were distributed for home media and other purposes by Fox. When Fox merged with Disney, or became part of Disney more accurately, they let that deal expire, and Warner Brothers took over the distribution, especially of like home physical media from Fox. You can even see some Blu-rays, DVDs of that nature that were originally manufactured by Fox. The exact same disc can now be bought and has a Warner Brothers label on the back. That's just a distribution deal. And it's a way for MGM to make money. A rather rapid succession, we found out that AT&T is essentially separating Warner Media out from the company and merging it with Discovery, the television networks, and also extremely successful streaming service for their type of content. Was it maybe even like a week and a half later, I think, Amazon basically confirmed that they had bought MGM. So that's a lot of movement in like a 3-week period.
I mean, this has kind of been a long time coming. I guess MGM has been having so many problems since like Skyfall. That was, I believe, what bankrupted the studio, right? One of the Bond films?
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird things, because there's a lot of deals where, technically, the Hobbit films were MGM films, but that was done in conjunction with Warner Brothers. So it's like there's a company with money going in and out of it that isn't physically producing anything. And if I'm correct, Skyfall had other companies in on the production as well. I want to say Sony. But it's kind of indicative of what has happened, where, there were those shots to try to really get back in the driver's seat through Bond, through the RoboCop remake, and they did not work. But MGM has such a catalog that there's always sort of a way to make some money if you're not making the type of money you want to make.
But when's that next Bond film allegedly going to come out? License to Kill, right? I'm assuming that's going to be delayed another 10 years now.
No, License to Kill came out a long time ago. What is it? No Time to Die.
Oh, that's what it is.
I believe is now moved to 2022, even though it was supposed to come out
this year.
I think 2020, correct?
Well, yeah, it was supposed to come out last year as the big like Bond revival, and then they pushed it back because of COVID, and then I guess they pushed it back again because they can.
Yeah, that could be a whole topic in itself. Once that movie's out, maybe we'll talk about that. That was another one where there was just a lot of behind the scenes chaos and apparently very, very broad rewrites. There's been a lot of rumors of things that were supposed to be in it that aren't, and things that maybe are that were added later. One being the death of James Bond and a new 007 being established to move the franchise forward, which, we're not really talking about that yet, but if that's the case, I think that's a huge mistake. But yeah, MGM just not in the shape they should be, even with a major franchise like Bond, which is part of the impetus for someone like Amazon to come and kind of eat them up. Is James Bond, the past catalog, the ability to make films is a big deal. And Amazon, this might be Amazon's biggest move as far as film goes thus far.
I don't know if I would... I think it's probably the broadest one, but I think the biggest one they ever did was trying to get that Lord of the Rings license, because that was like $1 billion, and now they're putting like another $1 billion into like just making it. Like the scope of what Amazon's been trying to do with Lord of the Rings is just massive, and I think it even dwarfs this MGM deal, which I believe they originally got the license from. So they had some partnerships in that beforehand. In a way, like, I'm glad that I'll be able to just see the fucking Bond films on a streaming platform without them being like piecemeal across like a million other platforms. But it also is just worrying to see like all these big conglomerates just get more conglomerate, or where they're just kind of eating up all the small fry at this point. Like, you see it with Disney and Amazon, and I think those are going to wind up being like the last two, like, because they have the most money in the game right now. That they're just going to eventually eat up like Discovery and whatever's left of AT&T.
That's interesting to say that, because I think there actually is something else brewing from a couple of other things that are a little less known as far as this goes. Let's backtrack a touch to that Warner Media separation. Warner Media, like as we said, is going to leave the portfolio of AT&T. There is some complex thing that I kind of got a good explanation on, and that you can seek that out. I would recommend. Grace Randolph does a really good job of kind of breaking it down much more competently than I would be able to right now. But essentially, Warner Media is separating from AT&T. AT&T still technically owns the company, but would have no real power over it. The idea would be for AT&T to sell that off, their shares in this Warner Media Discovery company. And that's where it gets really interesting, because we're living in this IP world where all these studios are trying to buy familiar properties, a complete result of 100 years of properties getting more and more familiar in Western culture. Like, it is unprecedented in that sense that, the 20th century really brought this type of idea into the culture, and now we're seeing the results of it 100 years later. This is something that I thought was super interesting. We were talking about that distribution deal with MGM going through other companies. Warner Brothers now has that deal. However, it's extremely likely that once the MGM acquisition goes through with Amazon, that's something that just leaves. That's fairly typical. Makes a lot of sense for Amazon, because then Amazon can do whatever they want with those properties. MGM has been kind of propping up the boutique physical media business for a long time, because they're very willing to license to anyone who would pick them up. Whether that changes now or not is going to be a question. Amazon could go, hey, there's no reason for us to put money into producing this physical media. Let's continue doing that. Or they might say, no, we want to control everything. The more interesting part of this is under a lot of people's noses, and it's something that a lot of people missed, myself included. I started doing research for this episode. Last year, Warner Brothers and Universal got together and formed a company called SDS. That is just Studio Distribution Services. And SDS's sole role is to take the properties of Warner Brothers, formerly MGM, but now whether or not that's going to continue is the question, and Universal, produce the physical media and do so together. So they're already working together on a lot of things involved in these sort of IP wars. And they've shown, at least from what I can see, a real willingness to continue to do what MGM was doing before with a lot of, the Shout Factories, Arrows, these smaller companies that are producing these boutique Blu-rays, and continue to license. Like, there has not been a dip from Universal, and it seems like Warner Brothers, who prior to this were somewhat resistant to that, are now kind of allowing it more frequently. That's important because of this link between Universal and Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers and Fox actually had a really great relationship before the Disney buyout. There was a lot of cooperation on their end. Now that cooperation seems to have shifted to Universal. There is a lot of buzz that Universal might be the kind of key to all of this now, and that Warner Brothers Discovery, whatever it's going to be called, was really formed for Universal to eat up. And that if they're able to do this, if they're able to conglomerate in that way, they will finally have a company with enough of these franchises to compete with Disney. Viacom is also a player in that. People say maybe they're looking for Viacom to buy them up. I don't know. Viacom always seems to be bizarre with their business dealings as far as I'm concerned. I've never understood their direction. But I could see a unified Universal Warner Brothers being real competition for Disney for once. It also then would open up a lot more production opportunities, I think, for the properties from either. You then also have the opportunity to combine your streaming, things like that. Peacock's not doing great, but it's also kind of a weird service. HBO Max is doing okay, but not at the level of like a Netflix or a Disney Plus right now. This maybe opens that door, and I think that that might be where this is going.
So you think these are going to kind of start eating each other up even more beyond this? Because this was kind of like a pattern in also the early 2000s when like AOL and Yahoo were a thing. Like they were just kind of eating up all these smaller like companies that eventually got eaten up themselves by around, I guess, the mid 2010s. Like that was a very weird era, like kind of the second term Obama era, where you also saw these companies just kind of get bigger and bigger, but also smaller and compared to like Amazon and Disney and like Apple and everything.
Yeah, I think this is the weird thing. 20 years ago, if we were talking about this, what it looks like is these giant companies kind of pillaging everything. And I think that's true. I think that it is true in that context and was true. At this point, because so much of that has already happened, I don't think you can blame them, and I don't think you can see it as a negative, because what are they supposed to do if Disney acquiring Fox, like, it's been a slow burn, but it's starting to pop up now where you're realizing just how much Disney owns, just how much of these popular franchises, valuable films they own. Do Universal and Warner Brothers have even a choice to not try to do something like this at this point? To even keep, like, because, like one of the things that sucks whenever this happens is like the immense amount of jobs that are lost. I think we're at a point where it's so competitive. The only way to keep any of the jobs is to make sure that you have a company big enough to fight off the other big company.
Yeah, I agree, because I mean, this goes back to like how we're working in global markets now, which is something that like Transformers accidentally discovered in like 2008. That now when you're producing films, you're trying to produce a film for every market, not just one market. And I think you also see it. I think this is just a general trend with like every company now, is that they're becoming more and more generalized, but more and more like niche as well. Like they're making like niche branches for like boutique markets, like you said, with like DVDs. Like that's Shout Factory's entire like mode of existence. It's just that they churn out DVDs from like these smaller former companies instead of being its own company in a way.
And even big ones, like they do a lot of work with Universal. It's, is the boutique market kind of focused on the companies that aren't putting them out on their own because maybe they don't have the resources anymore or aren't willing to risk the investment? Yeah, but it's not a universally with Universal, of course. It's not a universally small company thing. It's interesting, and I think Universal and Warner Brothers combining their forces to maintain physical media between themselves is an interesting move. It kind of shows a different mentality than maybe Disney has.
Yeah, I think Disney is very controlling of every single property they have. They do not like doing boutique physical media unless they are absolutely in control of it. I think Shout Factory accidentally stumbled on some Disney properties. Like they have Gravity Falls for some reason, which I'm still surprised about.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it's I think this has just been a long time coming since like 2000 that eventually like companies just buy each other out, especially when there's no like barriers for them not to. And with the rising budgets of films, this is just like you need bigger and bigger companies to kind of eat up the loss. Like that's how Amazon's able to produce like $1 billion Lord of the Rings TV series. Like because they have so many other hands and other pies that they're able to just like even if that series flops, they'll be fine. Like it's just crazy to think about to see like all these companies just like become kind of massive and unwieldy in a way and just kind of like eating up whatever properties that they can to make like bigger and bigger budget films when I don't think that's necessarily what you need to do. Like you have companies like A24 that make very successful art house horror films, I guess you would describe them, or even just art house films in general. But even those have started to go up in budget as like those films have become more and more successful.
Yeah, and they also have something that I was about to talk about too. Is we really focus on these massive studios. I think it's fair to say that most of the blockbusters for the last 5 years have been Universal, Warner Brothers, or Disney. But you also have companies like Lionsgate, Viacom still in there, Sony, largely working with Disney on their blockbusters, which is an interesting deal in itself. But they all seem to be kind of following that pattern that Universal and Warner Brothers are as well. Lionsgate has a deal with Walmart and the Vudu digital platform, and they pick up a lot of the stuff you were talking about. The retail versions of the A24 films are almost always Lionsgate. They'll pick up a lot of what's going on. They were pretty good at that licensing early in the 2000s. They made a lot of good money as far as that goes. The same can be said for Paramount, Viacom, however you want to see them. Paramount is now picking up a lot of the Miramax properties that obviously are in a weird spot with the Weinsteins right now, but making sure that those films are available. They're not doing much more than taking the discs that were already created and just printing more of them. But still, it's, if no one was making money off of these little kind of pockets of the industry, no one would be trying to. It's the best way I can put it. And the fact that now we're seeing this sort of market where digital is definitely dominant, but everyone is concerned about being able to get whatever product they can out of whatever IPs they have. We might end up in this weird situation where the companies are huge, but we're somehow still getting these very tiny things happening because they're so huge that people are just looking to see if this little division's making money and this little division's making money. I don't know. It's a weird spot.
I kind of disagree on that because these companies are so big that they're often only focused on a handful of things. I think you see it a bit with what happened with AT&T and Warner Brothers. Like AT&T kind of went slightly bankrupt over this entire deal, but during that time, Warner Brothers is very unfocused outside of just maybe like the DC universe they were calling at the time, those series of films they were making. And even those were slightly abandoned in a way, like halfway through. I think you see it more even in like smaller markets like comic books. Like a lot of these companies are just very uninterested in the smaller profit margin stuff. And I'm kind of wondering if they start selling or licensing those smaller stuff out to other companies, but like beyond that, they're just focused on like maybe 3 or 4 things because that makes them the most money, and everything else just kind of falls to the wayside. You see it all the time with Viacom, though. Viacom also seems like it's run by crazy people. Like the decisions they do, like is just beyond me. And I think you see a bit more in like how Disney treats like the video game division. Like they don't have one. They license it out to random fucking studios. Like the Avengers Square Enix Disney deal was kind of a disaster because Disney didn't really care what happened with it. But they made all these like really absurd demands on it. And I think you start seeing that more and more, like more of these weird licensing deals that are a lot of money but wind up being terrible because the companies only don't care about it.
I think you have a really good point there. My thought would be is I'm a firm believer that as time passes, things tend to smooth out. I think you're right. I think these big companies that have all of these goals as far as investors, things that are going to look at these big profit margins, they're going to look for the big hits. What I also think is that AT&T is getting out of media, right? That's kind of what this Warner Media thing is that they've decided we can't run this effectively from this point of view. Do you not think that going forward, a media company that's focused solely on media and is trying to hit everything they possibly can won't eventually realize that there are ways to make money on smaller ventures because it is a creative-driven industry? If you have a massive company that is media-driven as opposed to a massive company that is everything-driven, do you not think that it's possible for them to gain an advantage over, say, like a Disney who does have their hands in so many different type of industries if they're just focused on making movies and TV shows that are going to be successful and exploiting that success?
Well, I think the way this is going to go is that more and more of these companies are going to be everything driven. Like Disney's kind of in a weird position where they're like merchandise and media driven. But the bigger players that are coming into this picture are like Amazon and Apple, and it formerly was AT&T. And they have, their assets spread across several other things to kind of absorb all this risk. I think that's the direction it's going to keep going, is that more and more of these companies are just going to keep diversifying and eventually kind of become like these mega monopolies because there's nothing really stopping them from doing that. That's the way I think it's going to go. I know Disney's still media focused, but the way they look at the media right now is that they're kind of advertisements for like the next film. You see it in that they're kind of abandoning their smaller projects. Like in the I guess in like 2010s, they had a lot of smaller series going on. You had like Phineas and Ferb, Gravity Falls. Phineas Ferb became like massively successful. But since then, Disney abandoned all of that and they're focusing solely on just like Star Wars, on just Marvel. And that's how we're getting these TV series now, is that we just get The Mandalorian, we just get the Marvel MCU TV shows. I think that's the direction these guys are keep going in because that's what makes them money. That's what they can advertise merch off of. And they shut down kind of the smaller productions, like, what could have been an Avatar, what could have been another Gravity Falls. They're just not interested in those things. That's the way I think it's going to go. Like, even though they are media focused, they just won't focus on the smaller medias because $1 million to them, or even a couple $100 million, is just nothing at this point to them.
I think there is something valid in there. Yeah, we're gonna have to see how it does play out because I think there are a number of possibilities. I think there's also, a possibility that if a studio that has a good amount of money like Warner Brothers or Universal to throw around does start investing in projects that are a little higher risk, but could end up with a big reward, that itself could shake everything up. Like we saw a lot of that in the 90s of, Pulp Fiction, massive hit, changes the industry. If you want to go with something that's probably a little more likely type of project these days, like something like The Matrix, where it's not an established property, but it does something revolutionary. I think that's where I maybe do disagree with you a touch. Is I think there is still a way to break through, and I think there are still people creative-minded enough to push for that in high enough positions. We'll see though. You could be totally right. Like this could be like the end, but
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get another Matrix. Like, we'll get Matrix sequels, but we're not going to get something like The Matrix again. We're not going to get something like Avatar again. Those were anomalies. Like, even in the 90s, there was a million indie companies making these films. I don't think we're going to get those anymore. Like, the way, like, shows are being made is just, like, revivals of everything. Like, you write an original and they stick you onto some property they already own because that's safer for them. That's the way I think it's just gonna go. Like, that era's, I think, dying and is on, like, its death knell right now.
And this is just something I'm interested in just picking your brain on too, because I think it is valid. Do you think it's possible for something, completely low budget? I guess, the equivalent of sort of indie filmmaking these days would be, I hate to use this word, but I don't know what else to say because we have to use it all the time too, is the kind of content generation. Do you think there's anything that could get big enough to shake up the industry?
The only other, like, media industry I can kind of look at and see if there's a way to break through is, like, with the music industry, because the music industry is always accidentally on the cutting edge of these issues, even though the music industry does everything in its power to hold it back. But, like...
Can't stop rock and roll.
Well, yeah, exactly. Now it's SoundCloud rap. Like, SoundCloud is an incredibly popular and influential machine. TikTok as well is incredibly influential for music generation, and that's where you're starting to see, like, new talent rising up. That's where Little Nas come from, and Little Nas is, like, probably one of the biggest pop stars right now. It's also where you kind of see, like, BTS and things like that. There's not that space anymore in, like, the film industry. Like, you either go on Netflix or you go on Amazon. You don't really get to go anywhere else. And because of those are your only two avenues, you're being drowned in just, like, a million movies from all across the world. At least with, like, similar to, like, video games in a way, in that, like, you just have Steam and maybe, like, a few other platforms, but everyone fucking goes on Steam. But Steam at least has, like, a curation system. There's a way to find new games. Like, Netflix doesn't have that. Amazon doesn't have that. You just on there and you just hope for the fucking best. And the best is often not that, because you're just competing with a million other things and there's no way to find new content. Maybe YouTube, but, like, the media atmosphere of YouTube is very different than, like, the film atmosphere of, like, what Venmo was trying to do, which I guess is, like, dead now. Not Venmo, Vimeo. That's. I think there is a possible way, but I don't think that way, like, even exists anymore, because, like, Netflix and Amazon just kind of controls that. You can maybe do YouTube, like what Rooster Teeth did, which is now part of HBO, which is now, I guess, part of Discovery and fucking AT&T.
Not yet. Government has to approve it, but don't worry.
And you can maybe do YouTube, but YouTube is also such a really weird platform. It's very hostile to, like, trying to make an independent TV show. That's not, like, what they want. They want you producing something every week, not in, like, spurts, but, like, forever. That's your job now. So that's how I kind of see it right now. I mean, I could be wrong. There could be, like, a new YouTube that comes out, but I think that's very unlikely because Google just controls that avenue. And Netflix and Amazon just control the other avenues. I think it's just a weird position for media to be in now. I think, but with, like, music, it's easier to distribute. That's why you have your SoundClouds. That's why you have your Bandcamps. and you're able to just find new stuff on there. Media just doesn't, like, film and TV just doesn't allow that right now. Like, maybe way back when we had TV sets, you could just accidentally flip onto a show. You can't do that anymore because, like, Netflix curates and everything.
Yeah, so I mean, what we learned today is that creativity in film is dead. We should just give up. I don't think that's true. I think there's always a path, but it's going to be very interesting. I think the next, a lot of the people who were talking about this early on were saying a lot of movement we're going to see in the fall, if not a little before.
Yeah, this isn't done yet. Like, I think like next step is going to be video game industries. Like, maybe Bethesda gets bought up. Who the fuck knows?
But it's kind of depressing, but it's kind of interesting too to see exactly how this is going to play out with, there was a status quo for quite a long time, and I think that's about to change significantly.
I think we'll get some more coherent decisions. Like, maybe we'll actually get, like, Avatar: The Last Airbender stuff. Well, we saw Metalocalypse come back after it was kind of canceled for no reason. We're getting Venture Brothers and Aqua Teen again. Aqua Teen just naturally, but, like, Venture Brothers was just also kind of just randomly canceled because AT&T just ran out of money.
We can't act like that's AT&T's fault. Cartoon Network has been a complete nonsensical mess since it started, so like, it's never made sense, and I just don't expect them to. Any final thoughts here?
This week, check out the Neil Gaiman Library. This is Neil Gaiman, as I'm sure everyone knows, written a bunch of books. They recently collected a lot of his more miscellaneous comics into a library series from Dark Horse. A library series being, like, their bigger, like, deluxe version hardcovers. So they collected a lot of his, like, smaller comic books and novels and things like that into really nice hardcovers. There's 3 volumes out right now. And also, that's just to commemorate the new casting of the Sandman film. Supposedly, we're getting a Sandman film finally. I will believe it when it's out. Just like how we're supposed to get a Why the Last Man thing.
I think they're both supposed to happen again. Not with Joseph Gordon-Levitt on Sandman, which would have been fun, but there's rumors about him maybe showing up in the Endless MCU as well, so we'll see what happens. My end, I don't think I have any recommendations. I've been watching, I played Night Trap. That was on sale on PSN. I don't know if it is anymore. That was weird. I watch a lot of Hoarders on Netflix. Right now we're in a bit of a lull for me. I really did not like Captain America. Oh, I'm sorry, not Captain. Well, it is Captain America eventually, but Falcon the Winter Soldier. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah,
but,
I think we can talk about that with the Loki series, which I have a bit more hopes for. I mean, I also did not like it very much, but we'll get there when we get there.
Hiddleston always makes you feel like maybe it's going to be okay. That's how I feel. But outside of that, be sure to support your local and small businesses, and don't necessarily give all your money to these giant conglomerates that seem to be getting bigger. If you'd like to search out some toys, some statues, anything of that nature, check out ToyStoreGuide.com. They're going to hook you up with the best in your area. We kind of already did our final thoughts, so I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Cutler.
And we'll see you next time.